I'm Jenna Robinson, president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, and I'm here today with David Randall, who is the Director of Research at the National Association of Scholars. I'm here to discuss his most recent report that was released in November called Disfigured History: How the College Board Demolishes the Past. So David, that's a pretty bold statement and a pretty bold name for your report. So what do you really mean by disfigured?
What I mean is, one, a terrible amount of distortion in the guidelines of how history is presented. And then two, a great deal that's simply removed, absent, such that you don't have the proper context to understand, well, the history of liberty foremost. And what I had in mind, frankly, was the Taliban destruction of the Bamiyan statues, the orgy of iconoclastic rioting last summer, as the rioters removed the statues and left absences behind. The College Board has left terrible, gouging, disfiguring absences in history.
And you'd think that curriculum is really decided by schools, by teachers. Why is it that the College Board has so much influence over the curricula?
It's fascinating. It's the hinge of history instruction in high school and colleges. The textbooks have to be written to qualify for an AP course. That alters how the textbooks are written. And then the College Board advanced placement courses are no longer really advanced placement courses. Therefore, quote, college readiness, unquote. And that means they've become the senior history courses in most of the nation. Therefore, all high school history instruction is geared to get you up to the 12th grade, advanced history courses. Everything is therefore done in terms of curriculum instruction, teaching to the test, to have the students pass the AP. And I believe the figure was by now something like a quarter of high school students, each year are taking an advanced placement course. The number who are having their curriculum being massaged to fit what the College Board says is history is therefore presumably a pretty large majority by now.
So this is creeping into courses even if they're not AP. Is that because they're using the same books?
It's because you're supposed, well, partly it's using the same books, but partly it's because you need to prepare. There's always a sequence. 9th grade history, 8th grade history is done to prepare you for 10th, 11th, 12th grade history. It's always a sequence, which makes some sense after all. But that means that if you've seized hold of the last part of the sequence, every earlier part of the ladder has to get changed in accordance with it.
I see. So in your report, you write about 3 specific courses, and you found problems in how those courses are presented, how the material is presented. Let's talk about U.S. history first. Tell me some of the biggest problems that you found with the U.S. history course.
The 2 biggest ones, I guess I would say, are the absence of liberty and the absence of religion. They're not absent, but they're strangely diminished. The word Christian barely appears in US history. There's an extraordinary range of topics from the Constitutional Convention to the modern conservative movement, where the word liberty is simply absent in how they discuss it. And the thing I found the most telling was when they talked about the Gettysburg Address. They talked about it as a recommitment to a democratic nation. They somehow forgot that it's about a new nation conceived in liberty. And the absence of the very concept of liberty means that the Gettysburg Address and everything in America's struggle for liberty becomes either an afterthought or gone.
Mhm.
And then religion, again, it's there, but strangely muffled. You don't have the enormous amount of religious abolitionism, for example. You're trying to understand, how can you understand the Civil War if you don't understand the passionate Christian abolitionism that inspired John Brown, that inspired slave preachers, that made the Civil War a crusade for liberty. And because they have the banal mention of moral causes for abolitionism, some phrase like that, you simply don't get that at all. And American history without liberty and without freedom, I mean, this is a very pale mockery of American history.
Right. I don't even understand, how can you teach the founding period at all without mentioning liberty? It seems like you would be censoring every other word, you'd be censoring the original documents. How do they get around that?
There is a fascinating question as to how much they actually teach the original documents. The College Board explicitly says it's optional. Teachers can teach the founding documents, but they don't have to. And in a teach to the test universe, which alas is the one we live in, that anything which is optional simply isn't going to get taught. As to how else you teach it, I mean, there is unfortunately a century-old teaching of American founding as this is the propertied elite, imposing its power by means of the Constitution. Let us talk about the Constitution as a mechanism for elite power rather than as the fundamental document of liberty. It is unfortunately all too easy to teach that as the majority or the sole interpretation.
That's extremely unfortunate. I'm shocked to hear that there are high school seniors who are not learning our founding documents.
And I mean, it is unfortunately all too common. And how should I put this? Some teachers will try to do better. I get emails from teachers who in effect say, I try to do more. I try to put in liberty in the founding documents, but there's this constant terrible pressure from the administration, from the students who want to do well on their AP test so they can, save a few $1,000 at college. Why are you spending this extra time? Why can't we hurry on to what we have to know to do well on the test?
Right. Now, I remember there was a significant controversy over the U.S. history AP course in the AP exam a few years ago. And my impression at the time was that it was a little bit resolved. It had gotten a little bit better. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yes. Although I will have to say that started before I started work at the National Association of Scholars. So the person who went point on that was NAS President Peter Wood. In effect, the first round of the College Board's revisions was U.S. history. They came out with this obviously terribly biased and politicized document, which notably didn't even mention the Founding Fathers. They then made cosmetic changes, including ostentatiously, why, look, we have mentioned the names of the Founding Fathers, but structurally, it was much the same. And in effect, the College Board said, look, we've listened to your objections and revised it. A number of critics believed them and thought, okay, victory has happened, let's go away home. But in effect, it was the bones of everything that was bad about it remained. In effect, it was not loudly anti-American. It simply quietly passed over every reason to love and cherish America. That's an improvement, but
Right.
not one to be terribly happy about. Thanks.
So in addition to the problems with US history, you say that there are significant issues in the European history course as well. Can you give us some of the most egregious examples? And keep in mind, I know very little about European history. I was schooled in, American institutions where it wasn't taught nearly enough. And so Keeping that in mind, what are some of the most egregious examples that we might all know?
I should say, by the way, if only because the NAS was criticizing the American history exam the longest, I actually think the American history exam is probably the best of the three. I don't think it's great, but I think the others have not been subjected to the healing power of criticism nearly as long, and therefore they need even more work. The European history one, again, liberty. I mean, this is actually for all three of them. This sheer absence of liberty is the most egregious absence. And so you talk about the Renaissance without talking about the fact that, Niccolo Machiavelli wanted republican liberty. You talk about the new monarchies of European history in the 1500s and 1600s without mentioning there were parliaments who sought and gained liberty in the Netherlands and England. They simply wipe out, and this is related, virtually all of the startling history of liberty in England. So in the creation of parliamentary liberty in the 17th century, they're simply referring to that as this is the aristocracy's control. They don't talk about the culture of liberty in 18th century England. They don't talk about the judicial decisions which underpinned, for example, the first anti-slavery actions, well, anywhere in the world, in England of great consequence. There's a few other things elsewhere, but basically that they don't talk about economic liberty, and that's crucial for the story of England's Industrial Revolution. They then, in addition to missing liberty, they shortchange faith. Faith disappears from, say, 19th century history. You don't even hear about Florence Nightingale and the Salvation Army. When you're talking about modern European literature, Tolkien disappears because he's a man of faith. When they don't talk about nations, and because they don't talk about nations and religion, all of Eastern Europe, is hardly there. You don't have Russia and its history for an extraordinary amount of time. There's so much more. And then by the time you get to the Soviet Union, there's then sort of the downplaying of the Soviet horrors. That's gotten better thanks to our previous rounds of criticism of them, but there's still, I keep on hitting them on this. They use the phrase, the elimination of the kulaks, to talk about Stalin's terror starvation of the peasantry. The elimination of the kulaks was the Soviet propaganda phrase. And they keep on trying to somehow pretend that this is a shorthand that people will understand, when it's as if American history used the phrase the peculiar institution to refer to slavery throughout, and people just said, oh, that's a convenient shorthand.
That's pretty bad. And it sounds like from what you've said that their treatment of the Enlightenment must be either absent or, terribly flawed.
Narrow. That is, they have the Voltaire radical Enlightenment. They don't have Edmund Burke, whose liberalism and conservatism are both part of the Enlightenment. They don't have the religious thinkers who incorporated the Enlightenment into their faith. That's from in America, Jonathan Edwards, but William Warburton in England, Moses Mendelssohn, who incorporates the Enlightenment into Judaism. In effect, Reform Judaism comes out of the Enlightenment. It's actually a rather important thing, and there's nothing of that there. They don't have Edward Gibbon's view of history, and my heavens, I mean, the Enlightenment without Edward Gibbon is in the Enlightenment with a hole in its heart.
Absolutely. And you said that U.S. history is the worst of the three. So
the best of it's the best of.
Sorry, the U.S. history is the best of the three. So
world history is the worst.
World history. That's where I was going next. World history. It's the worst of the three. Tell me more.
And that's in effect because it was a hasty revision. I mean, that's, I think, it would have been bad anyway, and partly because of what world history is, but they tried to unveil a redone world history. It was going to be, instead of from like 8,000 BC to the present, it was going to be 1450 to the present. And then a bunch of radical world history teachers attacked them and said, this is horrible, it's Eurocentric, you're not giving enough for, all the time when, Europe wasn't dominating the world. I mean, horrible stuff. But to do so, they hastily tacked on a new unit from 1200 to 1450, which is a cut and paste job. And what you have in this course and exam description is this repeated phrase: the states of Asia demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity. The states of Islam demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity, throughout the world, until you get to Europe, which actually did demonstrate, innovation and diversity. But they don't include that for Europe, because diversity is, of course, a euphemism for non-European.
Right.
But the fact that they simply used that one phrase, repeat, copy and paste, that alone would be enough. There's then stuff.
You said this is a revision. So when was it better? Was there a time at which the AP US History, World History course was not awful?
Yes, I mean, until basically, the David Coleman regime came from, imposing Common Core on the country, and that's in the late 2000s. He next decided he was going to do the same stuff via the College Board. So these things started coming out about 2013. Before then, in effect, they didn't have a list of, a detailed list of subjects in this way. It was simply, you should know history. And there is this unfortunate desire to have, whenever you have a list of study topics, which makes it easier for students, they then don't study what isn't on the list. And I must say, as I've taught in the classroom, you can see precisely how this works as a teacher day to day. I mean, it's a terrible idea, the idea of having, here is the list of topics you must study.
Right. It sounds like also by having that list of topics that you must study, it takes away some autonomy from the teachers themselves.
It also micromanages, yes. It gets rid of all flexibility. It makes it all cookie cutter. So it's cookie cutter, and it's a abbreviated education. It's something of the worst of both worlds.
Have you heard complaints from teachers who are having to teach this? Because of course students want AP credit, as you said earlier.
Yes, I mean, and look, how should I put this? I would not, on the whole, hear from the people who are happy about this. So my sample is obviously going to have, the people who are unhappy about it strongly being the ones reporting to me. But yeah, and in fact, they say, yeah, it's like that. We're forced to teach what we don't want to teach. It's not the best education in the world. I should say, by the way, the strongest evidence that the AP exams are not what they used to be, there are dozens, perhaps hundreds of colleges which no longer give advanced course credit for AP courses. And that's partly, it's the blatant politicization, I think, but partly it's simply this whole marketing to be college ready rather than advanced placement.
Right.
They're marketing to get more students and therefore making it less rigorous.
I mean, that's not to say that college history courses are any better.
I mean, there's this
not much.
There's this constant race to the bottom. I mean, but
so
I would, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, in effect, the better portion of college history teaching is made worse by the College Board. Obviously, people may be astonished to learn that, yes, the worst college teaching will be even worse than the College Board.
Right. So obviously this needs to change, and we'll get to that in a minute. But our viewers probably also want to know some alternative books and resources they can read or use right away to learn real history. Because as you say, if textbooks are now teaching to the test, if you pick up a modern US history textbook or a modern AP European textbook, you're going to get what the College Board wants you to see. Do you have any recommendations where people can go if they want good, a traditional history of, of the survey course, really?
So for American history, Wilfred McClay, Land of Hope, is been rolled out. This is an excellent new, it's meant to be a textbook for the textbook market, building out lesson plans. This is happening as we speak. And indeed, this is, the NAS has another project, which is in effect trying to help build out lesson plans for Bill McClay's.
Yeah, it's a great book. I
Yeah.
agree.
So Bill McClay's is the, the best thing. Modern. I should say, I mean, frankly, going with anything old is probably not, not bad. Just go back to 1950 or 1960 and you'll get everything up to 1960 pretty well. I will say, when I was teaching European history, Jackson Spielvogel's textbook struck me as decent enough. That would be, early 2000s at this point.
Mhm.
Well, again, it's a textbook and so on, but it wasn't bad.
Right.
I loved myself as a kid the earlier editions of Thomas Bailey's American Pageant, which, by the way, is the most popular AP history textbook out there. It's been going strong since 1956. There's this oddity that it's partly the original good text, partly the later revisions, which will tend to make it worse. If you were to read the 17th edition, half of it would be good history. If you go used, and I can tell you this because I read it, I was so fortunate to have an old textbook in my history when I was in high school. The 1960 edition, Thomas Bailey had this wonderful puckish humor and purple prose style. He just made American history a joy to read.
I think that's the book that I used when I was in high school to learn for my AP US history course, and I remember liking it. I'll have to go back and look.
And then for European history, there's no end of things one could read. A man named what's his name? Norman, is it not Stone? Norman somebody has a 1,000-page history of Europe, which is a bit Poland-centric, as I recollect, because he was a Poland specialist, but nevertheless is quite good. For intellectual history, everybody should read Jacques Barzin's From Dawn to Decadence, which will intellectual history gets left out grievously of even the best history textbooks. People should read that. And for world history, heck, you could go back to H.G. Wells and not do badly. But what the
What I'll do,
Durants.
David, is I'll follow up after this interview,
Yes.
and I can include in the comments some recommended history books from you.
Yeah.
So lastly, what can be done? The Martin Center has promoted making syllabi at public universities public, so there's sunlight on what is being taught. And your report does that same thing for AP courses. But other than providing sunlight, which I know we both agree is the best first step, what do we do next? How can we reverse course and get back to AP courses that deserved the name?
There are two things I have in mind. First, you need to found a new assessment company that provides rivals to the advanced placement exams. There are none. The ACT provides a rival to the SAT, but the IB, International Baccalaureate, simply doesn't provide the equivalent. You need some company willing to go to invest the rather expensive amount of money needed to build that. It's a major project, but it needs to be done. The second thing, get each state to have rigorous requirements for high school graduation and state assessments, which are as rigorous or more rigorous than what the College Board provides. And this is something that a state legislature can do. But although it needs to be hands-on and it can't leave it to the state departments of education.
Right. Are there any states that get this right already that could be used as models?
In practice, no. In what should be done, Massachusetts in 2003 came up with a system that involved a rigorous series of standards for history, civics, everything, and a statewide system of assessment to make, so to hold the teachers accountable for if they fail to do it. The bureaucrats stonewalled until the friendly administration left the State House, and then the next administration, vetoed it. But in the Massachusetts model from 2003 shows how it can be done with all the moving parts. It also shows you need to have a determined generation-long political campaign to get it in.
Well, it sounds like we all have our work cut out for us then. We've got our marching orders. We know what to do next. Well, David, thank you so much for talking to me about your newest report. It's called Disfigured History: How the College Board Demolishes the Past. David, tell our listeners, how can they get your report if they want to read a copy?
You go to the National Association of Scholars website, www.nas.org. You then, you go down through the menu, but we have a reports and pages submenu, and from there you would go to Disfigured History, or just search for Disfigured History, within the NAS. And it should come up. If you can't find it that way, then email me at randall@nas.org, RANDALL@nas.org.
Well, David, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you, and likewise.
Thank you all for tuning in.